up until about 9 years ago, I had a very busy, very active life, and until one day I walked into a local grocer and I bought some contaminated meat, and which put me in the hospital almost the same day. And from that point on, I started to fight for my life through something that neither my doctors understood or I understood. And I went through 3 years with the medical system trying to find the answer. And at the end of the 3 years, my doctors gave up on me and left me to die. During that 3-year period, I went through a whole cascade of symptoms from this exposure with still no understanding of what had gotten into my body. From the initial hospital stay, I had a tremendous allergic reaction. I was covered with all these boils and ulcerations on my body. A tremendous fatigue, and no matter what they did, they couldn't clear it. Then when they released me from the hospital, it developed into bleeding ulcerated colitis, reactive arthritis. I finally developed fibromyalgia. I couldn't lift more than 30 pounds of weight without my muscles tearing. And finally, the whole thing cascaded into my knee tearing, one of the ligaments in my knee tearing that resulted in some surgery. I finally developed an incredible, horrendous hemorrhoid situation requiring extensive surgery. And then I wound up with 2 SVTs, supraventricular tachycardias, along with my heart stopping twice. They were successful in correcting that with radiofrequency ablation, but I had none of these problems prior to this event. And the list keeps going on and on. I eventually got coastal chondritis in the rib cage area where I had nothing but spasms for nearly 7 months. And well, after the 3 years, my doctors finally told me they had done all that Western medicine can do and told me to go home and die because they didn't know what was going on. And that was probably one of the most horrifying moments in my life. I didn't know where to go, what to do, who to turn to. And I remember leaving the doctor's office, going back to my car, just bowing my head in a silent prayer for God to help me. And then after that, a few months after they had given up on me, I met a very amazing man. One day I was trying to research this thing myself to try to get to the answers, and I went down to a local health store, and I heard this gentleman talking to this woman who was having esophageal spasms, and this gentleman was trying to tell her that she had parasites in her system, and that if he would work with him, he would help her to get clear of the problem. But at least the word parasites got into my mind, and no one had mentioned that before. So when I heard this gentleman talking to this woman, I gravitated over to him and I said, I couldn't help but hear you talking to this lady about the parasite issue. And I said, can I talk with you? And he said, yes. So I took about 10 or 15 minutes to give him the 3-year history of what I'd been through. And he looked at me with sympathy and he said, it sounds like you came in contact with some pretty heavy parasite activity. He said, I can schedule you for a live cell examination. He says, anyone done that for you? And I said, no. I said, I don't even know what it is. He said, well, I'll show you. So he scheduled me for 3 days later. I arrived at his place. I had this little heart monitor on me because the doctors were trying to figure out why I was still getting all these problems with my heart. And we sat down in front of a microscope. He took a little bit of blood from my finger. Didn't really hurt. And we watched this TV monitor hooked up to this microscope. And when that monitor came on, I got a really very impressive revelation of what had happened to me that all my doctors had missed. Once he gave me all the bad news, I looked at him and I said, okay, now that you have given me all this bad news, how hard is this thing to fix? And he stood up from his chair and he looked down at me where I was sitting, where I'd made all my notes. And he said, the sad thing about this, he said, Kevin, is this thing is easy to fix. And if it had been caught sooner, you wouldn't be going through what you're about to go through to clear your body through. So he looked at me and I said, okay, well, what do we have to do to fix this? And he said, well, we can go one of two directions with it. I want to introduce you to technology developed by Dr. Beck, he said. Bob Beck is the word that he used. And he said, we can go that way using that technology, or we can use an herbal approach. The herbal approach, though, is a little more expensive, he said. So I started with the silver. I drank about an 8-ounce glass every other day, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 2 weeks. And what I started to experience was horrendous die-off symptoms, is what I now know what the scientific community and the medical community refer to it as being. But the symptoms I experienced was all this prickly and burning going on through my body when I took the silver. And I had a lot of fatigue. He said, I can't tell you when it's all going to stop, but one day it will stop if you'll just stay with it. I said, all right. I said, I don't mind, as long as I know what I'm going through is part of the process and something that is a normal part of the reaction to be expected. So I said, okay, let's just stay with it. I'll endure it. And I think at that point, after 1 month, I started to brave the blood electrifier. So right away I realized what the Beck unit was doing. It was attenuating the parasite load that had gotten started, obviously, from the meat that I'd eaten. And, but I had to experience the die-off, and also in time I was going to have to bring the pH where it needed to be, but that wasn't important right now. I needed first to get my system cleaned out. So I continued down the course of that year that I was walking down. I finally added in the Beck ozonator. So I continued with that. Finally I added the magnetic pulse generator about a year later. I just wanted to see if it would help some of the areas where I was having some pains and aches while I was going through all of this. And to my surprise, it did help. It helped ease the areas where I would have aches and pains. But I really, the ozonator I think did a lot more because of the oxygen that it delivers into the body. So finally, within about a year's time, I was on the full Beck protocol. Now I was having live cell blood exams done every 6 or 7 months just to watch the progress of this, because with my background in working with engineers, I know the whole scientific process, and I tried to keep working with my doctors so they could see what was happening. And my primary care physician got scared. He finally sent me an I quit letter and said he didn't want anything further to do with me. I obviously knew he was scared of probably losing his license, so I thought, all right, well. But fortunately, not all the doctors I worked with were that way. My cardiologist, when I told him what I was doing, especially when I showed him the videotapes of my blood, he was so impressed. He looked at the first video where my blood was a mess, and then we saw it 6 months later, and all I was using was the Beck unit. I was using just the electricity and just the colloidal silver, and the difference in the blood was incredible.
We can see great looking red blood cells here, no microbes popping through the membrane, strong edges, well nourished, well separated, so that these cells can easily convey oxygen through the capillaries. This is really an excellent shot of Kevin's blood after 7 months. Here's another great snapshot. You can see well separated red blood, strong, healthy membranes, no microbes punching through from the inside. This is a real great snapshot of Kevin's blood in 2003. Very little microbial activity, just see some small somatids and spores. but no rod-form bacteria, no fungus or yeast. Great looking blood right in through here.
So I went for about 2.5 years working with the Beck protocol. I eventually did introduce just a few other things to assist me. I introduced an herbal formula that it's a very notoriously well-known combination of herbs that are very effective at killing worms and other parasites. And the reason why I did this was through the live cells. We were seeing some worm larvae still swimming in the blood, and I thought, well, those shouldn't be there. And that can only tell me that they're coming from one place, and that's from the GI tract. Even though these things are about the size of a red blood cell, they still can do havoc in the body. So finally, and I thought this was very, very serendipitous of putting this together, I used the herbal formula, and I wasn't quite getting the response I needed to see these creatures come out of my body. But finally, I got the idea one day. I thought, I'm going to get aggressive, because I'm seeing them in the live cell. I know they're there. We've got to get rid of them if I'm going to get well. So I took the herbal formula. I really boosted the formula. I took my Beck unit and started producing 1 gallon of silver every day, and kept doing the blood electrification. And within 3 weeks when I did that, and just to speak clinically, when I had my bowel movement, I suddenly started to pass hundreds, if not thousands, of worms, finally, with this approach. And I was delighted, quite frankly. So we combined the colonics. I still was doing the blood electrification, still taking the silver. We combined the colonics with the liver flushes, and the way I did that was once a week for about 2 months. One Saturday I would do a colonic, next Saturday I would do a liver flush. Colonic, liver flush, colonic, liver flush. Did that for 2 months. With the first liver flush, I passed all these calcification crystals coming out of the liver by the thousands. I passed all this blue, discolored stool, and then finally, little by little, the liver got cleansed, more started to move through my body, and with the colonics too. And within that 2 months, all of a sudden, all the die-off stopped. It didn't matter how much blood electrification I did, how much ozonated water, how much silver. It just, there were no more prickly, no more burning, no more fatigue. Fatigue was all gone. The fibromyalgia had ceased to be. I could now lift 80 pounds of weight. I tried it, none of the muscles would tear. Everything was fine. I was very tired after fighting this battle for 2.5 years, but I had just passed through a brand new door. And now we're 2.5 years later. I was originally on death's door, given up by my doctors. I had like 26 horrendous symptoms that were called incurables by the Western medical community, and I'm totally clear at this point, 2.5 years later, from a death sentence. In my particular case, I thought the 2.5 years it took, I thought would never end. And when it finally did, I was so surprised that I was past the whole thing. And once your body's cleaned out, and then you start working with your nutrition, and there are also other wonderful approaches that are available in the world community, you start passing through these invisible doorways of your health restoring. Just all of a sudden you start waking up, you're energized, you know. These days, the only remaining little problems I'm working on, first of all, I wake up every morning totally energized. I mean, my eyes are opening up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was sleeping like 22 hours a day when I was going through this from all the fatigue and die-off. I have a few little small fatty tumors in my back, a little cyst on my wrist. We're about to use a different approach, which also uses the Beck technology to go after these in the natural. And I think once I have these clear, I will be able to finally resume the life that I once had. Now, it's taken me 9 years to go through all of this. What got me to where I am today at the heart of everything I was doing was the Beck protocol.